of Ganga, it's a state protected monument in the heart of the city. It's sort of like a mini Taj Mahal, I would say. It was built with that same sentiment when one of my forefathers lost his wife during childbirth. So he built it in memory of her.
Now, this is a bit of a sneak peek we're going to request you for.
Okay.
Some work that belongs, is a rare work that belongs to your collection at Bhavnagar. If you could tell us a little bit about.
There's this one work which is by the artist John Griffith. He also designed the monument I was speaking about, the state protected monument, Ganga. So he actually designed that, and I always look at the monument steps and this painting steps which is there in our home, and I always compare those steps, and I feel like maybe he was inspired to either do that artwork first and then design this monument, or vice versa.
Hi Brijeshwari, welcome to the art room.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for joining us here. I would like to begin this conversation by knowing more about your journey and about you, how you came into the arts and how your journey has evolved over the last few years.
Right. So I think to start with, I've always been interested in the arts as fine art growing up, but I don't think I was ever talented enough to be an artist. Growing up, I had a lot of exposure to cultural heritage as a whole, not just fine art, and with my family background. And that sort of interested me to study art history and archaeology. And that's what I did my bachelor's in. Following that, I started working with the Bhavnagar Museum in Bombay, which had just been set up. And my fascination with actually curating and building a narrative and engaging an audience grew. And that's when I decided to do my master's. So that's kind of how the entire journey began. And then I obviously moved back home to Bhavnagar and saw that there was a lot I could do there. And that's kind of how things rolled out. Yeah.
And your background in archaeology actually took you to start restoring so many monuments around Bhavnagar, the Barton Library, the Raj Samadhi that you have.
You've done your research. No. So I think what happened was when I moved back to Bhavnagar, I sort of, now if I've grown up in Bombay, so you're used to a very fast-paced life, as you would know being in Delhi. And I studied in the UK, which was also pretty much the same pace and student life. So when I moved back to Bhavnagar, for me, it was I need to have something to do. I just needed to be engaged and busy. And while there are a lot of things that my family is involved in, be it family trust, education, for me, I wanted to sort of be able to do something and create an impact. And that's when I actually started sort of wandering around the city, I would say, and really looking at the historic sites, understanding the architecture and the engineering behind them, and also seeing how a lot of the dilapidated monuments as well as historic homes could be utilized and sort of put to some use in that sense and made financially viable. So that was the entire thought process. And I think when you sort of say this, it's much easier and it sounds all great and wonderful and fun. But when you start working on it, you sort of take a back step and rethink that, should I have really started this journey? Because it's, like you mentioned, Ganga Dairy. So it's a state protected monument. And when we were, so by we I actually mean this was a community initiative that I started. And it went on to then being Intact Bhavnagar, which I'm the convener of. So, but it started just as a community initiative. There were, a few like-minded people like myself who wanted to know more about the historic significance of these monuments and see how they can be preserved for the next generation. So that's how it sort of started. But when we speak of Ganga Dairy, it's a state-protected monument in the heart of the city. And for me, I actually really liked the entire sentiment with which it was built. So it's sort of like a mini Taj Mahal, I would say.
Oh, really?
But yeah, for Bhavnagar, it's quite grand. It was built with that same sentiment when one of my forefathers lost his wife during childbirth. So he built it in memory of her. And my family crest is carved out there and stuff. So for me, I think there was a lot of personal attachment that kind of grew. And I felt the need that, this monument should be preserved because I saw stray dogs just like sleeping there, and the monument in pretty much ruins. There was vegetation growing across the marble and sort of breaking it apart. And I was like, oh, this should be easy, you know. They were like, oh yeah, you can write a letter to the archaeological department, and you know, that the work will
That's
just happen. It's just that easy. So very, very delulu of me. That's how I sort of started this entire journey. And it took 3 years. And I kid you not, just yesterday, we got these photographs. I mean, I wasn't in Bhavnagar. One of the volunteers sent me these photographs that the monument has just started being restored. So 3 years later,
Oh wow.
the work
Okay.
started. But for 3 years, I have had continuous phone calls, messages, written letters, everything beyond the sun to various people in the archaeological department. And I mean, it sort of became a thing where I was like, you know, I don't even know what my profession is anymore. I think I'm more of like a certified nagger or something at this point, because I'm just like writing letters and sending messages. I don't know why I'm doing this after a point. I'm like, is this going to serve a purpose? But then yesterday when I saw those photographs and, you know, actually work being done, it sort of felt that, okay, you know, if you have this tall standing, really nice looking monument in the heart of the city, and
Yeah.
people connect to it, people utilize its grounds and really the natural heritage around it. It's a public place as well as it's a space where, you know, people can come and interact with and build a community. So I think for me that community engagement factor was very important. And yeah.
And I really commend the fact that you actually dedicated your career to preserving Bhavnagar and its
Yeah.
history, and being from a city and the kind of, you know,
Yeah.
opportunities that you could have had
Yeah.
given your family history.
Yeah.
You still stayed back and worked and tried
Yeah.
to, you know, uplift even the local arts of Bhavnagar.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you know, when you come from a place of any privilege, I think in life, you sort of, at least for me, I sometimes have like an imposter syndrome. So then I feel like I really would like to create an impact or build on a narrative, especially any kind of legacy. I think it's something that most people across the globe and world, you know, sort of work with. It's like today, if your mother has a gallery, you would want to be part of that gallery and build on that legacy.
Right.
So it's the same thing, you know, you want to build on a legacy. You've seen, you know, you have that family background, you want to build on it, you want to sort of make an impact, and that's what I've honestly tried to do. And the more I see people engage with the cultural heritage of the region, and the more I feel that, you know, it's sort of something's happening. So job well done in that sense. But yeah, I mean, when you talk about the crafts of Bhavnagar, we recently took on an intact passion project where there was this very dilapidated museum. It had a lot of old crafts of Bhavnagar and the Saurashtra region. So you had local embroidery work, bharat kam and beadwork, so moti nu kam, and a lot of woodwork, metal work. So a lot of these local crafts that were displayed there. But I mean, probably 50 years back when it was displayed very nicely. But due to a lack of sort of management and real upkeep, it was not in the best of state. So we took on the task of actually firstly waterproofing the entire place, because that's the main issue with most historic structures right now. So actually waterproofing the entire area and removing all the artifacts, re-archiving them, so digitally archiving them, creating accession numbers for them, photographing them professionally. And now what we're doing is we're using the artisans of Bhavnagar to rework with some of the artifacts that are damaged, or you know, certain places where the beads have kind of come out, or the fabric is dilapidated. So to restore them to its former glory. And then obviously, you know, sort of we'll be displaying those back, but creating a more engaging narrative.
Correct.
Which probably appeals to today's generation more as well. So
Okay.
yeah.
And you know, some of these artifacts and some practices that you mentioned, there are now very few people who are still living and carrying that family legacy of those practices forward, and we tend to not see these traditional practices as much. Do you think that these traditional art schools over the period of time have declined, and what has really been the impact of that?
See, so I think the whole art school kind of came with the British in a Western sense in India. I think prior to that, with patronage, with royal patronage, you had miniature school ateliers. So you had, say a Bikaner School of Art or a Jaipur School of Art, and you have all these miniature schools, but they were essentially just ateliers of people employed to create, patronize to do certain artworks. And the same way you had weaver centers and artisan clusters. Now, I think slowly with time, obviously we've gone to art schools and a more sort of technical way of studying art, I would say, over the years. But what has happened in the process is I think we've lost a lot of our local styles of painting as well as the usage of local pigments. So, very similar to this, we have an old historic structure owned by the family, and it's got these beautiful fresco paintings. We were trying to understand the pigments and the dyes that were used because they were all derived from natural, flowers and sort of dyes that you found around the area. And we realized that there's no documentation of this because the moment that school of art kind of sort of diminished and people just dispersed, nobody really documented what art, sort of what pigments were being used, what colors were used. So forget the style and the form of the artwork, but we don't even know, we don't know a lot of how those pigments and the techniques were actually done. So I do think that kind of, we've lost a lot of that heritage in the process. Obviously, a lot of regions have managed to document these better than others. But I do feel that somewhere art schools in India can, bring in a lot of traditional art forms and sort of marry the modernity with the traditional art styles. And I mean, you have a lot of contemporary artists exploring that in their artwork, but it's not something taught in a school. So I do feel that somewhere that's something that can be really brought in. It's very similar to design as well, where I think schools such as the National Institute of Design, for example, do end up having one part of their semester where they have the choice to work with local artisans and, sort of like bring in their techniques into their own modern designs. So I think that's something that one needs to sort of work out, where we can bring the old and the new and
it's interesting you say that, because in Gujarat, Baroda is one of the hubs for contemporary art.
Absolutely.
And somehow today's young buyer is not being able to interact or buy traditional art forms. So do you think that there is any sort of a crossover that we can have between contemporary and traditional art that we can appeal to maybe a younger audience, and if not a younger audience, the audience at large?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, see, what's also happened is that most of the times now, if a young person is buying a piece of art, they are buying it with the intention of displaying it in their homes. And most homes are modern in terms of their design and the architecture. So then you do want an artwork or a piece that gels well or blends well with that design. And I do think that, I think it's the onus of a designer and as well as an artist on how they draw inspiration from these sort of local art forms. I think Baroda does a very good job of it. Also because you have MSU, which is which is one of the best art schools in India right now. So I think they do that job very well. Also, Baroda has always historically been an art center. I think it's it's had many great many great rulers who have been patrons of the art, right from Sayaji Rao with Raja Ravi Verma. So that's something that is more common knowledge. But I think a lot of artists have got that platform because of the way the city has sort of thrived on the art. It's lapped that art up and appreciated that art. I think other cities and other regions, besides obviously a more cosmopolitan Bombay or a Delhi, a lot of other smaller cities have not yet done that. They've not seen value in the artists to be able to purchase it. I recall sort of trying to put together an exhibition of contemporary artists such as these in Bhavnagar, and the main question being who's going to buy those artworks.
Correct. Yeah.
So it's very easy to display the art and give an audience the taste of what these artists can offer, but then you have to create the demand also for those artworks. So I think it's a demand and supply situation.
And then you mentioned that Baroda has such an
Yeah,
interesting history, and now and Bhavnagar
yeah,
too. How do you think that we can actually promote cultural and heritage tourism and
yeah,
bring people to these cities to come explore their
right,
history and actually interact with such
yeah.
exhibits that.
So yeah, I was having this really funny conversation with somebody recently because I read something about a Bengal Biennale coming up, and I was like, it's great that different regions all have their own festivals, and
Yeah.
be it a literary fest or a Biennale happening. But I think what sort of happens in the process is it's the same model followed in every area
Hmm.
without really understanding the cultural landscape of that region. So I think where tourism is concerned, especially where it's tourism with regards to heritage and culture, I think one should really understand the place, the region, and then see what one can explore. For example, I think the Kochi Biennale was a great success in terms of bringing together local artists as well as bringing in international artists. But for something like, say, a Gujarat, I would say that the entire sort of design of something like that, especially in promoting tourism, would have to be very different, because you'd have to, one, understand that it's a dry state.
Hmm.
So when you're calling in international artists, when you're calling in any kind of when you're calling in a larger audience, I guess there are certain things which are a given, that okay, you're having an event,
There has to be
that,
wine.
yeah,
There
there
has
has
to
to,
be
yeah,
champagne.
yeah, it's I mean, it's a way of hosting someone, I
Yeah.
guess. So
Yeah.
it's a, nobody expects you to, like, call everyone for a party and then
Serve
serve.
Diet Coke.
Yeah. So I think the sort of design for each state or each region has to be very specifically tailored to that region.
Mhm.
If I were to really sell Bhavnagar's heritage, I would not sell it on the great dance forms or the great arts, but I would sell it on the education heritage, because
Hmm.
you have schools and colleges that are, buildings of schools and colleges historically that are built in a grander scale than a palace. So
Okay.
because there was a lot of importance given to education, to having an audience and a population that is very forward thinking and very well educated. So I think I would focus on those institutes because
Hmm.
they're all beautifully designed and probably create something within those structures.
Hmm.
Because I think any person who would be coming to Bhavnagar would be very amazed to see a school looking as grand as, probably a fort in some other
That
place.
would be, that's
So
amazing.
yeah, so I think that you have to really understand the heritage and the historic significance of each area and then promote tourism. um, yeah, I think heritage tourism as a whole is really having a field day where festivals are
Hmm.
concerned. But for just a simple art lover, I think there are a lot of things that we can do, which probably include more craft tours, more art tours, things that are more engaging, instead of just quick 3 day, 2 day
Yeah.
programs.
Programs. Right. Correct.
So yeah, things that really allow you to engage and interact with that region. So I think that's something that one can do. Yeah.
Now, we spoke about various institutions and how it should be tailored as per a particular region. And in fact, this time at an international institution like the Art Basel, India found representation through Kiran Museum and the Chanakya School of Art. What do you think is the impact of this for Indian traditional art globally?
I think there is, a great appreciation for Indian traditional art globally in any case. Even when you have sort of tourists for that matter coming and seeing a weaver in his, using his loom, or, an artisan doing a specific embroidery or Zardozi work, they will lap it up and they will pay the price. It's the
Hmm.
Indian audience that we will go to our local weavers and we will argue about that little 100 rupee difference. So I think sort of India has been known and been famous for its sort of cornucopia of cultural art forms, embroideries, and craft and artisans as a whole. And of course, the Chanakya school, I think, has done a fabulous job bringing in a lot of international designers
Hmm.
to work with local embroideries and handicrafts. But I think what's great is that a lot of art galleries are now appreciating the local art forms
Right.
and bringing in artists who also do that. For example, Kemold at Art Basel itself, I think, with this artist called Jaita's
Jaita
work.
Chatterjee, yeah.
Yeah, I thought that was so beautiful because she brought in, sort of local sort of craft as well as the entire segment of the entire topic of women in arts. So I think
Right.
that it was so beautifully done. And I think artists as a whole are inspired. It's for gallerists and sort of patrons, I guess, in that sense, to bring those artists up to that platform and give them the visibility.
And when we talk about patrons and you being a new age, today's royalist fan, so what do you think is the role of that patronage today?
I think for me, at least personally, and a lot of youngsters from similar backgrounds who I see, it's about how you build on that legacy and narrative. Obviously, we are not, we don't have our ateliers at home today with artists, miniature artists doing paintings for us, or, at that level. But I think that, when you've seen and you've been brought up with a lot of, or exposed to a lot of art and culture, growing up, and you've seen a lot of artworks that probably your ancestors had commissioned, then I think, at least for me personally, I feel inspired to do the same thing in whatever capacity I can. So I think that is also a responsibility of, sort of taking the arts forward in that sense. But I also feel that, you also have a lot of corporate families today who are the new age patrons, as you would say.
Right.
So, like, you have a NMACC center in Bombay, and you have a KNMA museum coming up in a more larger scale now. So, I think you have a lot of these corporate patrons as well who come up, who are coming with the same sense of duty and responsibility as well as interest. I don't think that this should be done in a charitable way, or as, especially with historic structures being restored, as a more CSR initiative. I think this should be something that is that you're genuinely interested in.
Right.
And I think that was something that a lot of royal families sort of did very beautifully.
Correct.
Where the genuine interest was brought, and that's why you had, be it a painter or a musician, or a poet who was being commissioned and who was being looked after by a family in that sense. So for me personally, I feel that, I do feel inspired by the arts, and I feel wherever I am genuinely interested in an artist or in an art form, I would definitely then invest in that. So yeah.
And along with your role as preserving Bhavnagar and rebuilding its cultural identity, you're also the VP at Princeps Auction House. Could you give us a little bit history about how auction houses came into being and how they have developed?
So I think personally for me, I come from a very preservation background, not from an art and sales background. So the concept of an auction house is very interesting. But I think in India, historically, the auction space, I think in the past, probably 2 or 3 decades, has really grown. I think previously you had, an Ocean that was started by Neville Tully, which was, probably one of the first, maybe along with Pandols. And, you had these 2, 3 big auction houses in that sense. But I think other than that, you still had a Christie's or a Sotheby's from an international background having a big hold of the Indian art space, where auction houses are concerned. But I think today you have so many other auction houses taking up that space that we barely see a Christie's or a Sotheby's. There are so many Indian grown auction houses that have really built up the art market in the past few years. And I think that's really commendable that, you have patrons in India itself only, or, people in India who see the value in art. So I think that's great. And I feel that there is still a space for the antiquity space to really grow, because I see a lot of auction houses, Princeps included, that focuses a lot on modern Indian art as well as contemporary Indian art. But I don't see a lot of antiques and antiquities. Probably, maybe Pandols might be, I think in my opinion, probably the only ones who really put out a lot of antiques and, sort of historic Indian art in that sense. So
And so many of these traditional artists are actually winners of so many awards,
Right,
and such
right.
rare awards
Yeah,
that they win,
yeah,
and still they are not able to find that kind of
yeah,
representation at auction houses
yeah,
as to somebody. And these are, most of them are living artists.
yeah.
So I think it's so important for auction houses to also give them the similar platform.
Absolutely, 100%. I think we see that in the West, while I think in India we've still not got to that point. I think where auctions are concerned, we're still very, very. We have our favorite artists
Yeah.
who come up in every auction, and it's
The
more or
price
less,
keeps going
yeah,
up
and the
and up
prices
and up.
just keep going up for them. But I think that there's so much room and scope for bringing in more real talent for that matter. So yeah, definitely something that one can build on.
And Brijeshwari, what do you personally collect?
What do I personally collect? I
And if
think,
you have any tips for a young
right.
buyer, that what they should buy and how they should buy.
I mean, personally, I like to collect what looks good in what I would like to see every morning when I wake up. Let's put it that way. So, for me personally, it's honestly a mix of sort of works where like I was observing the artwork here. For me, there's something where there is detail and there is actual skill put in. I think for me that matters a lot. And then of course, sort of beauty is in the eye of the beholder. So like aesthetics matter to me. I wouldn't say that and I would give that tip to any person from my sort of little experience in this space, that buy something that you won't get tired of looking at, because obviously I understand that a lot of people buy art as a way of diversifying their portfolios and investing and everything, and I think that's all great, but if you don't like to see it on your wall, it's just pointless
It's
then,
something
right?
you
There's
have
no
to
soul
live
to,
with.
yeah, there's no
Yeah.
soul to it then. So I think that's very important to me. Yeah.
Okay. Do you also collect some antiquities?
So I think personally, I don't collect so many antiquities because there are too many in my house. but 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 I was mentioning that auction houses, there are not many that are doing work with antiquities, and this has been something that's really interested me, because I feel like the antique market has somehow got this very, like, either it's about repatriation of objects that one sees in the news, or it's about something very shady happening in an antique scene. So I think that kind of narrative needs to be changed, because I feel like ancient Indian history, if you look at the arts, that's where everything started from. And unfortunately, I think during the 1971 emergency, and that time period was such that a lot of antiques were smuggled and traded. And because of that, people are very wary of, like, sort of purchasing antiques or going into the sort of buying and selling of them, unless you're a seasoned collector, or you're someone who's, especially for young people, there's an apprehension that am I getting the right thing,
Right, right.
is it licensed, and you have to have an ASI
And not too much
certification.
clarity on the process of
Yeah,
buying, where to buy from.
exactly.
Yeah.
So I think that it's antiques as a whole, especially our sculptures, our bronzes, they're such an important part of our cultural heritage, and as well as sort of ways that which we can mark how we as a craftsmanship, as a society, have evolved, right? Because you
Right.
see the way art form has kind of moved forward then. So I do feel that there's a lot of space for auction houses to come into that. I don't know if I'm going to be buying any of them, but I'm sure someone will.
Yeah.
So I do feel that a lot of auction houses and galleries can really, bring a lot of antiquity to the forefront and
Yeah.
talk about it and see how the buying and selling can be more transparent and clear.
And they have the right resources in
Yeah,
place, so they're able to track down the
exactly.
work and everything.
Yeah, yeah.
Right. Now, this is a bit of a sneak peek we're going to request you for.
Okay.
Some work that belongs, is a rare work that belongs
Right.
to your collection at
Right.
Bhavnagar. If you could tell us a little bit about that.
Right. So, I mean, I think for me, there's this one work which is by the artist John Griffith. It's of these women walking down a temple, so sort of walking down the temple steps. Personally, John Griffith was the principal of the JJ College of Arts. He was a very important part of the Bombay Art Society back in the day, and he also designed the monument I was speaking about, the state
Okay.
protected monument, Ganga Devi. So he actually designed that. And I always look at the monument steps and this painting steps, which was, there in our home. And I always compare those steps. And I feel like maybe he was inspired to either do that artwork first and then design this monument, or vice versa. But I feel like that artwork really, I really like the way that there's this certain softness and calmness to it, which you don't actually see in a temple, because there's always chaos, I feel. So, so, so I think that the way he's kind of created this very calm and composed, where, people are aram se walking down a temple. I was like,
And women were not.
yeah, I was like, yeah, that's not how it works. But it's this, the view of the gaze of the Orient. And I really enjoy seeing that. It's one of those works which, you don't get tired of seeing on the wall.
Thank you so much for
Yeah.
sharing that with us. That's something, we would have never been able to compare or see.
Yeah.
And that brings us to the end of our discussion. Brijeshwari, thank you so much for joining us here at
Thank
the
you
Art
so
Room.
much. Thank you. It was a pleasure chatting with you. Thank you
And
for having me.
just a small request, if you could just sign this mug for us.
Okay. That should be fun.
It's a little bit of our Karan Johar moment. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
This is a small token from our side.
Thank you so much.
It's carved by a digital artist called Arjun Mehta.
Okay.
I hope you enjoyed wearing it.
Thank you so much.
Brijeshwari, I noticed your shoes. They're very, very beautiful. Can you tell me a bit about that?
Thank you. So they're actually made in Bhavnagar by our local artists. I find the entire process very interesting because it's so the shoe making is essentially done by men, like sort of male shoe artists, and but before that, the fabric is taken by women and they embroider like local motifs, so like just floral motifs and stuff that you find. And so the embroidery is done, and then after that, obviously the men do the entire shoe making of it. But yeah, it's all made in Bhavnagar and crafted by
Lovely
artisans.
shoes.
So, yeah.
And if our audience wants to find these shoes somewhere, where can they?
Oh yeah, you can just sort of message me. I'll get them done for you.